The early morning mist clung to the village of Amaigbo like a ghostly veil, quiet and undisturbed. My childhood memories were bathed in this calm, where the air smelled of roasted yams, and the laughter of neighbors echoed down narrow pathways. But my story, the one that still haunts me, is not about the peace of Amaigbo. It's about the man who shattered it, the man I called Papa but wished I never had to. I was 6 when my father died. A hard-working farmer, he'd been the anchor of our family. With his passing, my mother, Adiku, was left to fend for me and my younger sister, Amora. Despite the whispers of pity from villagers, she held her head high, determined to be both mother and father to us. It was during these years of hardship that my mother met Obinna. He was a tall, brooding man with eyes that seemed to see everything yet reveal nothing. A trader from Onitsha, he had arrived in Amaigbo with stories of business success and promises of stability. To my mother, who was drowning in bills and responsibilities, he was a lifeline. Their courtship was brief, and soon Obinna became my stepfather. He moved into our modest house, bringing with him an air of authority and a strictness that felt unfamiliar. At first, I thought it was simply his way of adjusting to life with us, but as time passed, his control tightened. Obinna was a man of rules. From dawn till dusk, my sister and I were expected to follow his commands without question. Children must be disciplined, he often said, his voice hard and unyielding. What I didn't realize then was that his idea of discipline was closer to cruelty. One rainy evening, I had forgotten to fetch water from the stream as he'd instructed. I was only 7, and the sound of thunder had frightened me. But Obinna's anger was merciless. He dragged me out of the house, forcing me to walk barefoot through the muddy path to the stream, the rain stinging my skin. "If you can't obey simple orders, you will learn the hard way," he sneered, his voice echoing through the downpour. From that night, I understood the true nature of my stepfather. Life under Obinna's rule became a series of silent sufferings. My mother tried her best to shield us, but even she could not escape his wrath. Any sign of disobedience was met with harsh punishment, and his methods were as inventive as they were cruel. Amora, only 5 years old, was too young to understand, yet she bore the brunt of his impatience just as I did. One evening, after we had come home late from school, Obinna demanded an explanation. My mother tried to explain that we had stayed back to help a classmate, but Obinna's fury was immediate. He ordered us to kneel outside the house for hours, our knees pressed into the rough gravel. The pain was unbearable, yet we dared not move. "You are under my roof, and under my roof, you obey me," he declared, his voice as cold as the night air. As the months turned into years, the house that had once been our refuge became a prison. Amora and I learned to be invisible, to do as we were told, and to avoid drawing attention. My mother became a shadow of her former self, her eyes losing the sparkle that once defined her. But even in the darkest times, we found ways to survive. My mother would sneak us small treats, moments of kindness that reminded us of the love we shared. She would sing us lullabies at night, her voice soft and gentle, a reminder that we were not alone. However, Obinna's cruelty reached a new height when he forbade us from attending school. "Education is a waste for people like you," he sneered. "Your place is here, learning discipline and hard work." It was then that I realized he was not just heartless, he was determined to break us. As I grew older, a seed of defiance began to sprout within me. I could no longer stand by and watch as my mother and sister suffered. I would find ways to sneak out and attend school, hiding my books under loose floorboards in my room. I studied late into the night, fueled by a desperate hope that one day, education would be my escape. My secret came to light one afternoon when Obinna found one of my notebooks hidden in a corner of the room. His face darkened with fury as he flipped through the pages. "You think you're better than me?" "Smarter," he spat, tearing the pages to shreds. "This foolishness ends now." That night, he forced me to stay outside in the cold, warning that any further defiance would lead to consequences. But the taste of knowledge, of freedom, was something I could not give up. With each act of rebellion, I felt a spark of resistance grow within me. My mother, though fearful, began to support me in small ways, slipping me food and books, urging me to hold on to my dreams. It was a dangerous game, but one that gave us hope. By the time I turned 16, the situation had grown unbearable. Obinna's control over us tightened, and his cruelty became more inventive. My sister and I were forbidden from speaking to neighbors, and any attempt to seek help was met with threats. But I could see that my mother was nearing her breaking point. The once strong woman I had known was now a shell of herself, her spirit crushed beneath Obinna's iron rule. One evening, as we sat in the dim light of our cramped room, I made a decision. "Mama, we have to leave," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She looked at me, her eyes filled with fear and sadness. "Where would we go?" "He would find us," she replied, her voice trembling. "We'll find a way. We can go to Uncle Emeka in Enugu. He will help us," I insisted, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. For weeks, we planned in secret, gathering what little money and belongings we could. The night of our escape was filled with tension, every creak of the floorboards sending waves of panic through us. But as we slipped out of the house, I felt a surge of relief. Freedom was within our grasp. Our journey to Enugu was not easy. We traveled by foot through forest paths, avoiding main roads where Obinna might find us. My mother and sister were exhausted, but we pressed on, driven by the hope of a new life. However, just as we reached the outskirts of Enugu, disaster struck. Obinna, who had been searching for us, spotted us from afar. His face contorted with rage, and he began to chase us, his shout echoing through the quiet night. My mother and I urged Amora to run ahead while we tried to hold him off. But he was faster, stronger, and his anger was like a storm. As he closed in on us, I felt a surge of desperation. I couldn't let him take us back. In a final act of defiance, I picked up a branch and swung it at him, catching him off guard. "Run, Mama! Take Amora and run!" I shouted, my voice breaking with emotion. My mother hesitated, her face torn between fear and love. But she knew I was right. Gathering Amora, she ran, disappearing into the shadows. Obinna's anger turned to rage as he realized he had lost. But as he stood there, breathing heavily, I knew that I had won. He could no longer control us. Months later, we settled into a small home in Enugu, living under the protection of Uncle Emeka. Life was not easy, but we were free. My mother found work, and Amora and I returned to school, rebuilding the lives we had lost. Though Obinna's memory haunted us, we found strength in each other. My mother regained her spirit, her laughter returning as we pieced our family back together. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that no amount of darkness could break the bond we shared. The story of my heartless stepfather was one I would never forget, but it had taught me the value of resilience, of courage, and of love. We had survived his cruelty, and now we were free.